I'm glad you've been able to join us for this weekly devotional. As I've been thinking this morning, trying to look at a lesson and think about some things, I come across this thought or this idea of what will I let God do with me as a child of God? What will I let God do with me? What will I face so that I might care for His work or do the things that He sends for me to do or to follow His will? We find Joseph as Jacob has sent him to check on his brothers, to see about their well-being and the well-being of the livestock. It says that he went. And in Genesis 37, verse 18, he says they saw him from afar before he came near to them and conspired against him to kill him. And they said to one another, here comes the dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of the hand, saying, let us not take his life. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood. And he had convinced them to leave him be, to just throw him in a pit, and that would be fine. But in verse 28 of that chapter, we find the Midianite traders passed by. And they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. You know, Joseph, as he went into Egypt, he faced many trials. He came up out in the house of Potiphar, and he served him well until his wife accused him of trying to rape her. And he was in prison for several years. He was forgotten by those whom he had helped. And finally, one came to him and said, I know a man. The Pharaoh sent for him and to converse, to tell him about his dreams and the situation they were in. And here he was, separated from his family, separated from his culture, separated from all of these things, in jail or in prison. And yet, he was faithful to God. He found himself in a position serving the Pharaoh, and yet being one of his uh, uh, greatest assets, being one whom the Pharaoh gave much favor and gave much. Uh, he tended to put his trust in Joseph. And we're thinking, well, it's still Joseph is far off. Joseph is still a slave. He faced all of his life in this situation, and we would think as human things go, he would be bitter. He would be angry. He might even be upset with God, and yet still he was, in our minds. But he said, but he was faithful to God. He was faithful to him. In chapter 45, we have his brothers coming in verses 4 through 8. And so Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, please. And they came near, and he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourself because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you for a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it's not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me the father of Pharaoh and Lord of all the house and rulers over the land of Egypt. Can you imagine this idea that as he was there, he had become one that was well noted, one was well favored with the Pharaoh. He said, God sent me here. God had a plan for me to come here and preserve life. And that plan, somehow or another, all of the evils that came upon him, he wound up in being accused of trying to rape Potiphar's wife. He came under the situation of being thrown in the prison. He had those who forgot all about him when they helped him or when he helped them. These are all these things, and yet he says, it wasn't you that sent me here. It wasn't you that did this. He said, God put me in this place. God put me in this place to do his work, to do his will. Then we go over to chapter 50 and verse 17. He said, as after Jacob died, the brothers came to him and says, our father had a command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers in their sin because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgressions of the servants of the God of your fathers. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not fear, for I am in the place of God. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. You see, Joseph continued to contend that it was God that took care of them. It was God that put him in the place he was in. God meant those things for good, even though they seemed like they were painful and difficult for a greater part of Joseph's life. God meant them for good. As a child of God, we have to question ourselves and think about what we're saying. What will I let God do with me? What will I let God do with me? It's difficult to be put in bad circumstances and to look out and think, why have you done this, God? Why have you let this happen? We really do not know where God will use us. But if we will keep or if we will remain faithful, God will use us even in the greater trials of life. I hope that as you go about your week, that you remember even through our small difficulties, God will use us. God will let us shine, or God will let us be used to let his light shine through us. In all circumstances, if we're willing to remain faithful, if we're willing to seek him, if we're willing to give ourselves over and say, wherever you want to take me, God, that's where I'll go. I hope that you can remember those things this week in the times of trial and time of difficulty, to realize that somewhere, someone's watching, and God will use you to do his will. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and may God bless.